Hi, and welcome back to the Anti-Alienation Project. My name is Maddie, and welcome if you're new here. Here on the Anti-Alienation Project, I talk about all things related to a certain form of child psychological abuse and domestic abuse by proxy, known as parental alienation. If you aren't familiar with what parental alienation is, it's what the term sounds like. It often involves a custody dispute or a divorce, but not always. It consists of one angry, spiteful parent turning their child against their other loving parent without true justification. I talk about this because this happened to me. Starting during my parents' marriage, around 7 and 8 years old, I was put in the middle and then made to believe so many lies and false accusations about my dad that by the time they divorced when I was 9 years old, I completely rejected him. And I did reject him for the next 20 years. I never once spent the night at his house. I figured out the truth that I'd been alienated from my dad, that I'd been made to believe lies and horror stories, and I had been manipulated and used as a weapon to hurt my other parent. I figured it out 2 years ago. I've been speaking out about this form of abuse for about a year now. I just want to alert society to how damaging it is for children. I wish I had known the term parental alienation before 28 years old, which is when I learned the term. I'm also forming a coalition of child survivors, so if you've been through this as a child, please join our support group on Facebook. A lot of exciting endeavors coming up, so stay tuned for that. I made a few other videos reacting to research. I came across this research study by Dr. Amy Baker called The Cult of Parenthood, a qualitative study of parental alienation. It was published January 1994, which is actually just 3 months before I was born. And I want to go over this study today. And that's what this video is going to be. So it's basically a former alienated child reacting to this study. I have to give my 2 disclaimers, as always. Number 1, I'm not an expert or a therapist or a researcher. I have the experience of living through this abuse as a child. Number 2, I don't speak for all alienated children. I'm going to react to this study, but I'm sure that another person who's been through this as a child might have a different reaction than I will. Let's get into it. Here's a brief overview of the abstract. Basically what the study is about, how they conducted it. 40 adults who were alienated from a parent as a child participated in a qualitative research study about their experience. A content analysis was conducted on the transcripts, and a comparison was undertaken to identify similarities between alienating parents and cult leaders. Adults whose parents alienated them from their other parent described the alienating parent much the way former cult members describe cult leaders. The alienating parents were described as narcissistic and requiring excessive devotion and loyalty, especially at the expense of the targeted parent. The alienating parents were also found to utilize many of the same emotional manipulation and persuasion techniques that cult leaders use to heighten dependency on them. They have excessive control, power, and adulation. Likewise, the participants reported many of the same negative outcomes that former cult members experienced, such as low self-esteem, guilt, depression, and lack of trust in themselves and others. These findings can provide a useful framework for conceptualizing the experience of parental alienation and should also be useful for therapists who provide counseling and treatment for adults who experienced alienation as a child. Wow. The introduction of the study seems to give different information about parental alienation. For example, children can experience 3 levels of parental alienation: mild, moderate, and severe. Guidelines for conducting a qualitative research study were utilized throughout the study. Subjects were recruited from word of mouth and postings on the internet. People who responded were asked to briefly describe their situation in order to ensure that the alienation was at least in part due to the behaviors and the attitudes of the other parent. That's important to make sure people are actually alienated. So they had appointments with people who met their criteria, and these interviews were voluntary. So the sample consisted of 42 adults, and they participated in an interview process. Finally, they had 40 participants between 19 and 67 years of age, 15 male and 25 female. 3/4 of the parents divorced during the participants' childhood. And in all but 6 cases, the alienating parent was the mother. Okay. And if you want to see more information about each specific participant, they have that information. They have the age of the separation, the gender, age of the interview. So here's the sample description. As you see, most of them are female. They seem to be a little bit in the older age range. The interviews followed a semi-structured protocol which ensured that the same information was obtained from all participants while allowing each person to tell their story in full. The interview aimed to understand in a focused way the subject's everyday life world as it related to parental alienation and the meaning of the alienation for them. Audio tapes were transcribed verbatim. Transcripts were then submitted to a content analysis with each unique unit of thought separated from the transcript and taped onto an index card. They were analyzing these interviews and separating each word and phrase into categories and subcategories, trying to extrapolate data. So here are the findings, which is the most interesting part of the study, of course. Here's the first finding, which is crazy. Number 1, a leader who requires excessive devotion. Check that off the box a million times. That's so perfectly worded, that phrase. Let's see what she means by this. Cults are organized around a leader, typically described as a charismatic individual who maintains ultimate power and authority over the group. Within the cult, the leader is designated as worthy of devotion and awe because of his or her superior capacity to comprehend the true nature of reality. This cult leader here that we're talking about, or the alienator, they're actually not living in reality. They're actually bringing their child or children into a fabricated reality that's going to cause a lot of damage in that child's life. So the fact that everyone in the family or everyone in the cult shows excessive devotion to the cult leader for comprehending the true nature of reality is so backwards, because it just couldn't be further from the truth. Due to this supposed unique and valuable knowledge, leaders are presented as able to understand members better than they understand themselves. I understand you better than you know yourself. Anytime I would have any thought, belief, idea, value that differed from my alienating parent, they would take it as a personal injury, a personal slight to them. It was as if they could not accept that I was an individual person apart from them. It hurt them. They thought I was trying to hurt them by simply having my own opinions. It is held that through great personal sacrifice, cult leaders are willing to share this knowledge on behalf of the members who require the wisdom and the guidance of the leader in order to function. That's a codependency. In return, members are expected to reserve their love and devotion exclusively for the leader, who has earned an elevated place at the center of their emotional lives. Cult leaders have been compared to psychopaths and narcissists because of their lack of humility in presenting themselves as superior to others, and because of their willingness to use their charm and persuasion skills in order to exploit and unduly influence others. The type that she seems to be describing here might be the more overt type, but I do have experience with the more covert type, and they will make people believe they are the most selfless person, mother, caring person. They'll make people believe that they're stupid, even though they're really intelligent. They'll make people believe they're poor, even though they have lots of money. They'll make people believe they're the endless victim, even though they're actually the abuser. That's the more dangerous type. So let's continue. The adult children who participated in the interviews described the alienating parent in similar terms. In particular, they perceived the alienating parent as needing to be the center of attention at all times and insisting on being the center of the child's emotional life. Quote, "She said she was at the center and everything was revolved around her." Another participant said, quote, "Mainly, I think she always wanted to be your everything. She wants to be your center of attention. And so she liked the fact that by making me hate him, all I had was her." End quote. That's exactly what they like. I can relate to that. In fact, many of the interview subjects described their parents as narcissistic, either using that label or using precise descriptors that called that term to mind. You have to be able to have some type of deficit in your brain in order to do this to your child. Watch the damage and the harm play out in the child's life and witness their emotional turmoil and continue to do it anyway. If you're not missing something in your brain or you're in your soul, something, then you really are an evil person to do that. So here's another way they bring it back to cults. In cults, it is not enough to feel devotion to the leader. Members are expected to demonstrate their devotion on a regular basis. Expressions of devotion include putting the needs of the leader first, never questioning the authority of the leader, confessing imperfections, allowing the leader to make all of the important decisions, and making public declarations of faith and love. These actions reassure the leader that the member is fully indoctrinated and further solidify the member's commitment to the cult. Oh my goodness. I think we need to break down all of that a little bit here because relatable with parental alienation particularly. It's not enough just to be fully devoted to the leader. You have to express that publicly. Boy, most alienated kids would probably agree with me. Definitely from my own life experiences, my mom first. The ironic part is that everybody believed she was so selfless, but she also managed to pull the strings like a puppet show so that everybody was thinking about her needs first. So it was very covert, never questioning the authority of the leader. Yes, any type of speaking out, pushing back, questioning the status quo. Like I said, she would interpret that as a personal slight, as if I were hurting her on purpose, rather than just expressing my opinion or having a different value than her. Confessing imperfections, that's another huge one. You are not allowed to make mistakes with this type of parent. Any mistake you make is going to be overblown, used to make you feel guilty and ashamed and just like really crap about yourself. And if you do make a mistake, you are expected to tell your parent. And then the allowing the leader to make all the important decisions, I think that really goes without saying. This type of parent demands to be in control of much of the children's lives. It says, in many cases, the expressions of devotion are public, with the aim of turning a public declaration of devotion into an inner desire to be loyal to the cult leader. By requiring such public assertions of faith and trust in the leader, cult leaders are exploiting the natural tendency in people to want their beliefs to be consistent with their actions. In this way, saying becomes believing. What's coming to mind for me is a child in therapy with their targeted parent, and they're saying what they believe or saying the stories they've been made to believe, whatever the case may be. It does solidify the alienation. It can really make it worse because that is an expression of devotion to the alienator. Even though they don't have the desire to degrade their parent necessarily, or they're not telling a lie on purpose, making those assertions about their other parent and about how they feel and what they believe, that can cause an alienated child to even more fully believe what they're saying. This process also occurred in the families of alienation. The participants reported feeling pressured to show their devotion to the alienating parent. Many described their relationship with the alienating parent as one in which their parent's needs were felt as more real and urgent to them than their own. In general, they experienced themselves as extensions of their parent, their primary function in life being to take care of, please, admire, reassure, and be devoted to them. What a sad existence. What a terrible thing to do to your child. To take away their true, authentic self just so you can have a shell of a human serving your own selfish needs and your own ego, making you feel special, make you feel needed, making you feel admired. That's a weak-minded thing to do. To break your own child, to feed your own ego. That's a weak-minded, very low-level, disgusting thing to do. A particularly important expression of devotion was an allegiance to and preference for the alienating parent over the targeted parent, of course. Some of the participants recalled being asked to spy on the targeted parent and keep secrets from him and her. Many participants said that they had made such negative reports to the alienating parent about the targeted parent, saying they didn't have a good time during visits, exaggerating small infractions or hurts, making false claims of harm. I definitely would have to reassure my mom, no, I didn't have fun at Dad's house. No, I hated going there. I don't want to go back there. I really don't want to sleep over there. A few participants recalled mocking the targeted parent, and one told of being encouraged to spit, hit, and sexually humiliate his mother at the behest his father. It's so sick. As with cults, loyalty and devotion in alienating families was extracted either through sweet seduction or through wrathful commands, and usually an alternating sequence of both. An example of the former was provided by a woman who described her mother and stepfather as being, quote, nicer than nice, end quote, doing everything for her until she eventually believed that they were the only ones we could rely on, that we had to be with them. In her family, demonstrations of loyalty took the form of hiding from her father when he came to visit and being rude to people in the neighborhood that her mother and stepfather singled out as being worthy of contempt. Through a combination of rhetorical skill and guilt inducement, this mother compelled her daughter to reject her father. If you love me, you won't go. That's the message they're sending. If you love me, you won't love them. At the other end of the spectrum, strategies for extracting loyalty was a young man who grew up with a raging, drunken father. He explained that, quote, there was a constant ritual every day. He would come into my room in the middle of the night and make me profess my faith to him. And if I didn't stay away from everybody else, that he was going to kill himself. He would do this and I would have nobody. One woman reported that her father wanted her to profess her exclusive love for just him, and he would beat her until she did. Many participants reported having to constantly reassure their alienating parents that they loved them best of all, and that they did not, in fact, have positive feelings for their targeted parent. Quote, she would start crying and say we didn't love her and that's just how it is, end quote. Yes. My alienating parent would always say things like, do you love me? It seems like you don't love me. What kind of daughter hates their mother? Promise me you're never going to leave me. Promise me you're never going to put me in a nursing home. Promise me you'll take care of me when I'm old. Boys leave, sons leave, but daughters stay. Daughters always stay. Promise me you'll stay. The ultimate sign of devotion and loyalty to a cult leader entails renouncing all other sources of influence. Just as cult leaders require an exclusive place in the hearts and minds of their members, these alienating parents seem to want to have sole claim on their children. Allegiance to the other parent was not allowed in these families, and the participants understood that there was to be an exclusive and all-encompassing relationship with just the one parent. They were made to feel that any contact with the targeted parent was a betrayal of the worst kind. One man said, quote, if I talked about my dad, it was like sticking a knife in her back. Another said he felt like a traitor when he came back from a visit with his mother. Ultimately, many of the participants were encouraged, if not coerced, to renounce their relationship with their targeted parent. Loving both parents would have been unthinkable, just as belonging to two cults at the same time is impossible. And in this way, many of the participants felt that they had to make a choice between their parents. Naturally, they chose the parent who they believed really loved them and was able to take care of them, the one who had been telling them all along that the other parent was unsafe, worthy of contempt, and did not love them. In time, most of the participants were turned against the targeted parent completely, withdrawing their love and natural affection towards them. More than one participant made a comment such as, quote, I remember thinking he should go ahead and die. I wish he would get in a car accident. I wish he would die. I don't want him to come home. That's tragic. It's horrible. The intensity of these and similar statements reflect the utter lack of ambivalence, which is a hallmark of parental alienation syndrome, that you have one bad and one good parent. The second characteristic of cults is that leaders manipulate the thoughts and feelings of its members in order to promote a sense of dependency on them. This, too, show through in the interviews of the adults who were alienated from a parent as children. There were 5 primary mechanisms for manipulating the thoughts and feelings of the children. 1, relentless bad-mouthing of the character of the other parent in order to reduce their importance and value. 2, creating the impression that the targeted parent was dangerous and planned to hurt the child in order to instill fear in that child. 3, deceiving the child about the targeted parent's feelings towards them in order to create hurt, resentment, and psychological distance. 4, withdrawal of love if the child indicates affection or any positive regard for their targeted parent. And 5, erasing the other parent from the life and the mind of the child through minimizing actual and symbolic contact. But for the sake of this video and the length of this video, I want to move on to the third aspect, which is that cults further the aims of the leader. It reads, the third feature of cults is that they operate for the benefit of the leader at the expense of its members. While they claim to exist for the benefit of the members who are in need of wisdom and guidance from the leader, the reality is just the opposite. The leader benefits from the experience much more than the members. In the situation of parental alienation, it would read, the cult-like parent furthers their own aim at the expense of the needs of their children. The benefits of cults to their leaders are both financial and psychological. Leaders of cults have unlimited access to money and assets accumulated. The psychological rewards of cult leadership are also plentiful. Leaders become all-powerful, all-knowing, worshipped individuals who can exercise control and authority at their own whim. I've always said one reason why parents alienate their children is to isolate and control them, and they can get away with anything if they don't have the protection of the other parent in their life. Similarly, this study continues, the alienating parents seem to benefit from the lofty place they held in their children's lives and from the elimination of the targeted parent. First, they appeared to have benefited by not having to share parenting time, by avoiding the complications of coordinating schedules, by not having to deal with the cooperation and compromise entailed in sharing a child with somebody they no longer live with or love. As Johnson, 1994, has noted, concerns about the other parent's ability to care for the children is pervasive in high-conflict divorces. For the most part, the alienating parents described in the study had the opportunity to raise their child as they pleased, without the interference of another parent. That's right. Most of the people who get divorced and alienate their child, especially severely alienate their child, they come to believe that this is what their ex deserves. It doesn't matter if the person has been a great parent. If they hurt me, thinks the alienator, they don't deserve to see our kid. Even though they are a great parent, essentially that's what they think. I don't care because I'm hurt. I'm mad. By having the child reject the other parent, the alienating parent likely had the satisfaction of the last laugh, so to speak. They had the opportunity to reject the parent in a way that was designed to maximally inflict pain and suffering on the child too, and they don't care. And finally, they seem to benefit from the narcissist's satisfaction of being the most important person in their child's life. Through the strategies described above, these parents extended the natural idolization of their children well into later teens and some into adulthood. By cultivating dependency on them, these parents delayed or avoid altogether the natural separation and de-idolization of their children. Wow. I got to do some research into that, the idolization of parent and the de-idolization of parents, because I remember being in middle school and believing or being made to believe my mom is like a saint and my dad is like a devil, like that, black and white. And I know the kids have black and white thinking before a certain age, but yeah, that's true. So that selfish parent is able to keep their children dependent on them by keeping their children emotionally and developmentally stunted, depraved. And thus, the parent wards off the natural feelings of loss and sadness that typically accompany the process of children individuating and living their own lives. That's why these parents have children, because they think the children will love them unconditionally and never leave them. Not a good reason to have a child. And then they get upset when their child starts to individuate and become their own person because, oh my God, I just wanted a baby that would never leave me. This section ends by saying, as the benefits to the cult leaders are many, so too are the costs to the cult members, us. Much has been written about the loss of identity, the loss of time with family, and the loss of dreams that result from extended participation in cults. The costs of cult participation are many, both psychological and financial. In addition to the financial costs associated with cult membership, former members describe the emotional harm done to them as the worst part of it. The emotional costs include diminished self-esteem from excessive dependence, guilt from having hurt friends and family, depression and sadness over lost time, difficulties trusting themselves and others. The participants in this study experienced each of these negative outcomes as a result of being alienated from one parent. The conclusion. The 40 adults who participated in this study described their parents in much the same terms that cult leaders are described. These parents required excessive devotion and utilized a range of strategies in order to cultivate their children's dependence on them. The perceived impact of the alienation as described by the participants matched many of the outcomes associated with cult involvement. These findings should provide a useful framework for adults who are alienated from a parent as a child and for clinicians working with this population. Limitations of the study. So there are some limitations of the study. The retrospective design, for example. Another limitation is that the participants varied in the age that they were at the time of the interview. And so a 19-year-old participant, for example, might have different outcomes than a 60-year-old participant. Future research and practical implications. Despite the limitations, the findings presented in this paper represent the first glimpse at the felt experiences of adults who experience parental alienation as children. To that extent, they can be used to develop hypotheses that can be tested in future research. It mentions 3 different directions for future research. Number 1, a longitudinal study of divorced families would be helpful for determining the proportion in which alienation occurs. A second direction forward could be a large-scale quantitative study of adults who are alienated as children, and have standardized measures for depression, self-esteem, and other outcomes. Yeah, further research definitely needed on this, and actually can possibly be used to try to get kids out of being alienated, because it seems very similar to living in a cult. Anyway, that's the end of this video. I didn't really expect it to be so long, but there was a lot to get into there, and I didn't even read probably half of it. So if you want to read the full article, I will try to leave the link in the description below. Please subscribe and turn on your little bell so that you're notified every time I post a video. Stay tuned for all the upcoming announcements, our conference, our book, a lot of things going on. I hope everybody's having a good end of the summer, and I'll see you next time. Bye.